An Article 5 convention. Have you heard of what that means? Do you know what it is? Most people would say, I have no clue what you're talking about. But today we're going to discuss an Article 5 convention, sometimes dubbed a convention of states, a con. It has a whole bunch of different names. But what it is it's a movement to change the United States Constitution. It's growing a lot of support. Is it safe? Is it dangerous? Let's talk about it here on American Made. So let's set the stage. Let's define our terms. What is a constitutional convention? Well, a constitutional convention is an official meeting of representatives of the people of a state or a nation for the purpose of writing or amending its constitution. So that's what that is. There's a movement right now called COS, Convention of States, a con. These are all names that are thrown out describing what it is. And they want to amend the Constitution. They want to add things to the Constitution. In some cases, take things away from the Constitution. And this is moving and progressing rapidly. And we'll talk about later in the broadcast how much movement this particular idea has been able to achieve. So maybe you're listening to this and you're like, wait, you just defined a constitutional convention as a group of people getting together to amend or change or write a constitution. Hasn't that happened before? Yes, it has. You are correct. In 1787, the United States had its first and only constitutional convention. It was in Independence Hall in Philadelphia, beautiful building. I was just there in September of 2024. And that is where George Washington and Benjamin Franklin and all these great minds, John Adams, they got together and they wrote our Constitution. Now, just for argument's sake, let's go back and look at that convention and see what happened, because it's the only one that we've ever had. So that first convention set a precedent, right? And the precedent was that they completely wrote the Articles of Confederation, which was the governing document at the time, and changed the ratification procedure moving forward. Now, we have the Declaration of Independence. It says that the people can alter or abolish their government, and that includes changing or rewriting the Constitution. And when the Founding Fathers put the Constitution together, they put Article 5 in there, which says you can change it, and it sets criteria for that. So this movement wants to do that. But we're going back to the original convention in 1787 because it shows a couple things. One, that the people who were there were extraordinarily intelligent. They were smart, educated, bright founding fathers who had a rich education. I would argue that George Washington or John Adams or Alexander Hamilton or any of these guys are 20 times smarter than your average American. So they got together and they were going to see if they could strengthen the Articles of Confederation, what they were going to do. They ended up replacing it all together. So it was a runaway convention to begin with, but luckily for our benefit, the Constitution was a very good result. So when they created the new Constitution as a result of the convention of 1787, they created our current Constitution. It has articles, it has amendments, and in the 5th article, it spells out how to change and amend the Constitution. And I'm going to read to you verbatim, we're going to throw it up on the screen, what Article 5 says, unabridged, unedited. So this is what it says. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which, in either case, shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress, provided that no amendment, which may be made prior to the year 1808, shall in any manner affect the 1st and 4th clauses in the 9th section of the 1st article, and that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. Now, first of all, that was one sentence. Unbelievable. There should be multiple sentences, a paragraph, but there's our founding fathers who were very educated and could handle such things. So that's what Article 5 says. So it says you can amend the Constitution. And I don't debate that. It's totally legal, totally constitutional to amend the Constitution. It's happened 27 times. But what we're going to talk about today is the Article 5 Convention of States movement and how it's dangerous. But we're setting the stage here with our history. So when you look at the highlighted text, we'll throw that slide back up on the screen. Read with me just the bold and underlined text. The Congress shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or shall call a convention for the proposing of amendments ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress. Now, when you highlight that wording above without the explanatory phrases, it shows the simplicity of who really is in control of a Article 5 convention or proposing amendments to the Constitution. It's the Congress, okay? Congress in 1787, they set this up with great intentionality and specificity. And when you read this, the Congress shall propose amendments to this Constitution or shall call a convention for proposing amendments. Now, it does say on the application of the legislatures of 2/3, but the states call the convention. Then Congress picks the mode of ratification for those amendments. So it's very obvious upon a reading that the states can apply for a convention, but it's Congress that ultimately controls it. Now, how could this happen? Let's look at this. Article 5, which we just read, offers 2 ways to propose amendments and 2 ways to ratify amendments. Now, let's look at that. So, proposing constitutional amendments, how could this happen? Well, the first way, Congress proposes amendments with 2/3 approval by both houses, the House and Senate. This has happened 27 times. If you don't know your Constitution, which you should, we have 27 amendments to the Constitution. The first 10 are the Bill of Rights. There are 17 thereafter, and every single one, 100% of them, were proposed the first way. Congress proposing the amendments with 2/3 approval by both houses. So it gets introduced, it gets approved by the House, and it stays within that. A second way to propose constitutional amendments, which this is the way the Convention of States, Article 5 people, this movement that I'm warning about, this is what they want to do. They want to call an amendment convention under the application of 2/3 of the state legislatures. Now, you remember, it says in Article 5 that states can apply for a convention. So that's what they want to do. It's never been done before. It's never happened. 27 amendments we have to the Constitution. Not a single one of them have been applied for through an amendment convention. So those are the 2 ways to propose. Now, here are the 2 ways to ratify the constitutional amendments. Congress may select the mode of ratification through either A, ratification by 3/4 of the state legislatures by sending the amendments proposed by Congress back to the states, or by ratification by the 3/4 of state conventions. Both have been used. But the most important one, in my opinion, is the way it's proposed, the way it starts. And we have a strong history, a 100% history of Congress doing that, and it's never been done through an amendment convention. So now, enter the Convention of States movement. I gave you that background. I told you how it's set up, told you how it works. This is now where we get into the present of this movement to amend the Constitution under a Convention of States. So those arguing in favor of a constitutional convention through Article 5 say that by the states ratifying a series of amendments restraining the reach and influence of the federal government, we can take a large stride towards restoring America by using the Constitution's editorial ability to restrict power. But the COS advocates do not want Congress to propose amendments the manner in which all 27 of our current amendments have been adopted. Instead, they think they can call a convention of the states to propose, debate, and ratify amendments independent of Congress. Now, this is completely unprecedented. And the people who are for an Article 5 convention, I think they're patriots. I just want to say that. I know a lot of people who support an Article 5 convention of the states who are part of the COS movement. If you go on their website, you're going to find names like Charlie Kirk. You're going to find names like David Barton. You're going to find names like Ben Shapiro. People like that. I think these are people who writ large love America, who have positive visions. But I think that this is a dangerous way to go about bringing about American restoration. And I encourage you to stay with us because we're going to talk about how I think we can do that independent of writing the Constitution or opening it up again. So the people who want to do this say that it can be done independent of Congress. But remember, Article 5, we went back, we read the text. It starts with the Congress, right? So the Congress gets to set the mode, they call the convention, and they also get to set the ratification. Now, the states can apply to Congress for a convention, but it's not obvious that Congress won't take control of the convention thereafter. So how would a COS work? Well, per the Convention of States folks, they say that the states would apply to Congress for a convention and run a convention, which would be consisted of unelected delegates selected by the states to propose and create amendments to revise the Constitution. Now, the Convention of States folks, they also claim that each state would send instructions. Now, this is true. When states pass COS applications, which 19 states have done that so far, they send instructions of how this would transpire. They're all different. But their delegates would go and, with an approved outline, suggest potential amendments, potential changes to the United States Constitution for debate. But the problem is this. We have zero rule book, zero precedent, zero history, and no structure for how this would happen. Now, we read Article 5, the whole text. Nothing edited, nothing abridged, nothing changed at the beginning of the broadcast. Rewind it if you need to. Where in Article 5 does it say how the convention would be transpire, or how the convention would transpire, excuse me? Where in Article 5 does it say how the delegates would interact? What's on the table and off the table for changing the Constitution? How the states would pick their representatives to go to this alleged convention? Where would it be held? Who would pay for it? The taxpayer? Like, what would that look like? We have no backdrop for this. Is Congress not involved at all? Because a plain reading of Article 5 is very simple to me, that the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of the 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments. And then it says Congress gets to set the mode of ratification. So it's not obvious that Congress isn't completely involved in this process. And yet the COS advocates say, well, Congress wouldn't have any involvement. I don't buy that. When have you known Congress to relinquish power or not to stick their nose in something? We'll get to that. So the COS movement, they have applications. The state legislatures pass it. It has various rules. All of them are different of how they would structure their conventions. And somehow we're going to change the Constitution and have no issues. Well, to me, it begs the question, who would control this convention? Right? And you see on the slide there, we've got some pictures of some familiar, maybe not friendly, familiar faces, but we've got AOC, the squad, Ilhan, Mike Johnson, Elise Stefanik, Steve Scalise, all these people. I would propose to you today that these individuals, or people like them in Congress, would control the convention. It seems obvious that when you read Article 5 that Congress has a significant role to play in this process. Do we trust Congress to change the Constitution? Remember, what does the Constitution say? Article 5, the Congress. It starts off with that. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution. It's happened 27 times. That's the method of proposal that's always happened. Or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states. That's what the COS people want. They want the states to apply to amend the Constitution and call for an amendment convention. But then they say, well, if we apply for it, then that means we get to control it. I don't think so. I think Congress still controls it. Congress also sets the mode of ratification. It says that later. As the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress. So it begs the question, who would ultimately control this convention? From my understanding, the only role the states can have in this process, according strictly to the text, is application to Congress for a convention upon the request of 2/3 of the state legislatures, which they're very close to getting 2/3, and that's why we're doing this show. And they get to participate, the states, in ratification, but it's only through whichever mode Congress selects. And we already talked about those two different modes of how that could happen. Ratification by 3/4 of the state legislatures or ratification by 3/4 of the state convention. It's happened both ways. And again, you have to remember, all 27 amendments to the Constitution have been proposed through and the method of ratification has been chosen by the Congress. We've only done this one way, successfully. We've never done it the other way. Now, this is where I think the big argument is. This is where I think the big point lies. That Congress now is power hungry, it's greedy, it's depraved. It already ignores the Constitution. We haven't had a constitutional convention since 1787, when the Constitution was ratified and created. And now in the year of our Lord 2025, we want to redo that with the type of folks we have in Congress today? And also, Congress is constitutionally authorized and tasked with necessary and proper legal powers and, quote, all other powers vested by this Constitution. That's in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18. And these are elastic clauses that Congress uses all the time for crazy stuff. They want to take money and send it halfway across the world for some project or initiative, or they want to do some sort of a lesbian ballet at some Ivy League university, and they say necessary and proper clause. It's necessary and proper for us, the Congress, to supply this sort of funds, or it's necessary and proper for us to pass this sort of law, even though it's not in the Constitution, for us to be able to execute whatever we think is necessary and proper. They use these elastic clauses all the time. You don't think they wouldn't use it to change the Constitution? Well, it's necessary and proper for the Congress to have a role in this convention to change the Constitution. They do that with everything else, with war, with finances, with budgets, with everything. Why wouldn't they do it with this? So this is the pivotal question, the honest question to you, the viewer. Do you think Congress is currently following the Constitution? If you're a supporter of the Convention of States movement, let me ask you, do you think that your Congress in the year of our Lord 2025 is currently following the Constitution? Well, I think the answer to that is no. We have wars that the United States is actively involved in, Israel, Hamas, Ukraine, Russia, and we haven't declared war. Congress is supposed to declare an act of war. That hasn't happened. Congress controls the courts. Congress institutes all of these lower courts and circuit courts, and judges are running rogue. They're not doing anything about it. The Congress is limited to its spending under Article 1, Section 8. Are we spending is Congress, I should say, spending our tax dollars constitutionally under the specific and limited restrictive clauses under Article 1, Section 8? No. They're not following the Constitution in hardly any form or fashion. So that's the honest question. Now here's the next question. If government does not follow the Constitution currently, why would they follow it if amended? In other words, if they don't follow the Constitution as it is today, why would they follow the changed version? And to me, it's not obvious that there's any reason why they would. So what's the real problem? Well, we'll get to that. So the Convention of States people have a few proposed amendments that they want to do, a few proposed changes, right? Now, an amendment, you have to remember, is a change. It's an alteration. It's not just purely some nice little addition. It's going to change things. It's going to alter our form of government, potentially, if they happen to follow it. But potential amendments proposed by the Convention of States. Well, the first one is a balanced budget amendment. They say we need to have a balanced budget amendment so that we don't have these big deficits, so we don't have a national debt, etc. I completely agree with that. We do need to have a balanced budget. But would an amendment change our current congressional spending? Because Congress is already limited to what it can spend money on under Article 1, Section 8. Go and read Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. It spells out what Congress can and can't do. Everything listed, they can do. Everything else, no. So they're already restricted to what they can spend money on, and they don't do that. So why would they do it with a balanced budget amendment? And then what does balanced budget mean anyway? They can just go and change the budget to fit whatever they want to spend money on. And it can be balanced that way with loopholes and back doors. And there are some states that have balanced budget requirements and they don't follow it. What's another thing they want to do? Well, a redefinition of the General Welfare Clause. The original view is that the federal government could not spend money on any topic within the jurisdiction of the states. I agree the General Welfare Clause, and these are copy and pasted, by the way, directly from the Convention of State website as potential amendments they want to propose. They want to redefine the general welfare clause. Well, I agree the general welfare clause in the Constitution is an elastic clause that's misused, but who's to say the redefinition wouldn't be misused? They also want a redefinition of the Commerce Clause so that Congress has a narrow and exclusive power to regulate shipments across state lines, not the activity economically of the nation. I agree with that. That's something that is a problem right now. But is changing the text they're currently not following and redefining it in verbiage that's potentially more clear for them to follow, is that a surefire way for them to follow it? Because it's pretty clear right now that they're not following it. So why would we need to redefine it to make it even clearer? I think the problem is the representatives. The problem is the people who elect the representatives. More on that soon. And then the fourth one, this is the biggest one. Excuse me. Congressional term limits. These people want to put term limits on Congress. These people being the COS folks, which I respect and like. But I just think they're wrong on this. Congressional term limits. They think that we need to have let's say a 4-year or an 8-year term on Congress. So you can go into Congress, you can serve, currently they have 2-year terms. You can serve 2 2-year terms or 4 2-year terms for a 4 or 8 term max, tenure, and then you're out. And that argument comes from the people who look at Mitch McConnell, or they look at Nancy Pelosi, and they say, look at these people. They're old, they're decrepit, they just keep being elected over and over again. We need them out. Okay, I agree that Mitch McConnell is a pathetic representative. I agree that Nancy Pelosi needs to be out of Congress. I agree that Maxine Waters needs to be, nowhere near our decision-making levers in our government. But do you really think if Nancy Pelosi was termed out that the people of California wouldn't just elect some younger, more articulate, more left-leaning Nancy Pelosi? If Nancy Pelosi was termed out, do you really think she's going to get replaced with somebody better than her politically? It's a left-leaning state, a left-leaning district. You really think Nancy Pelosi or Maxine Waters or AOC's district is going to produce term limits are holding us back, guys. I'm sorry. We have to keep electing Pelosi and we have to keep electing AOC because there's no term limits. Is that what her constituents and the voters in their districts are saying? Because they're elected every 2 years. Nancy Pelosi has been elected every 2 years. But she keeps getting elected. So if they put a cap on that and say, okay, Nancy, you're out. It's over. Term limit. You really think those people who'd voted her in again are just going to come back and say, you know what? That term limit thing really got us thinking. We need a pro-America nationalist in Pelosi's seat. I don't think so. Actually, I think term limits are already a thing. They're called elections. If we don't like our elected officials, we primary them and vote them out. And another problem with term limits, in my opinion, is that it actually strengthens the bureaucracy. Because let's say you limit a representative to two-year terms and they serve 4 years total. Or let's say 4 2-year terms, 8 years total. Most people know that representatives don't elect or don't propose any legislation in their first year. They're learning the ropes. They don't do anything significant for the first year or two, typically, because they're learning the ropes. So you're going to get people who get into office. They're going to learn the ropes, learn how things work, learn who's good, learn who's bad, learn the system. And then they're going to term out. And then some new green person is going to replace them. And then that process is going to continue and continue and continue and continue and continue. And the legislative aides, the staffers, the people who work for these representatives, who read legislation for them, who do networking for them, that run their schedules, etc. These people don't have term limits. They don't know their names. They're not elected. And they bounce around from representative to representative to representative. And these people are going to start grooming these constant turnover of green elected officials to basically be more swampy than they currently are. And I would like to have, by the way, somebody in Congress who's been in there for 20 years, who's an actually good person, who knows the ropes, who knows where the bodies are buried, who knows how the system works, who's been there over multiple administrations, to be a sage, to be a point of wisdom for younger representatives. I mean, we don't want the blind leading the blind. We want people who have been in there for a long time, who are actually good of moral character. And the second they aren't, you vote them out. Elections or term limits. All right. So a side note, I think this is huge. We got this picture here of Chuck and Hakeem laughing. If a COS would be a successful trump card to reign in the federal government, why are Democrats silent on this issue? They, on the federal level, that is, they hardly ever talk about it. You have some state Democrats who do, but on the federal level, you never hear Congress talking about this. You'll hear Republican congressmen, you'll hear Republican federal leaders talk about a convention of states amending the Constitution all the time. But the Democrats are completely silent. And think about it. Pick any other issue, the Electoral College, election integrity, abortion, taxes, DOGE. They screech. The Democrats, they screech, oh my gosh, this is a threat to democracy, this, that, and the other. But on this issue of a convention of states, complete silence. And if it is this trump card that we can just play and reset things and bring about a more conservative, limited, constitutional government, wouldn't the left be shrieking about this and marching in the streets saying how bad of an idea it is? Something to consider. Now, the COS does, the Convention of States, they have a website. They boast about their Democrat support. They have this website page here that's kind of hidden. You have to find it. It's not super obvious where it is. But they have this header image of Obama there giving this rally. It says change. I don't know why they picked Obama. It's kind of odd. But they have Obama there, change. And then to the right, you can see here a list of various state representatives across the United States that are Democrats who've supported convention of state application legislation within their various commonwealth to apply for this convention. I find that to be troubling. If Democrats are supporting this on a national, on a state level, but then the federal Democrats are being silent, to me it just seems like they're waiting to co-opt this. Yeah, let's open up the Constitution. Because imagine the political give and take that would happen. Like people who are on the right who want to have a convention of states, they just think we're going to be able to open this sucker up and be able to put a balanced budget amendment, term limits, etc., and then put the lid back on the bucket. But that's not how politics works, my friends. There are give and takes, backroom deals. I mean, we can barely get a budget through Congress. We can barely get a CR through Congress without weeping and gnashing of teeth and screeching, nails on a chalkboard, fighting. And we're just going to open up the Constitution and get exactly what we want and then put the lid back on? No way. It's going to be political give and take. Well, hey, you know what? We'll give you 15, or we'll give you 14-year term limits if you give us the Equal Rights Amendment. Or we'll give you a little bit of a redefinition of this elastic clause in the Constitution, but you give us gay rights codified in the Constitution. DEI codified in the Constitution. You pick it. It's going to open a Pandora's box, folks. And in our over-litigious, over-Supreme Court-focused country that warps the law to fit their progressive agenda, taking a pen and a pencil, let's just say, a pencil and eraser to the Constitution isn't a good idea. Glenn Beck has been a supporter of this. I've got a clip of him, but I don't think we have time to talk about it. But Glenn Beck used to be a supporter of this Convention of States, and he said, I no longer support it. I withdraw my support. I've actually got the quote here. He said, I've been a supporter of the Article 5 Convention of States, a big supporter, a vocal supporter. I'm reversing that today. We are not the people to open up this sacred document. That was a God-inspired document. Do you believe that we could send delegates to a convention today that would have that kind of inspiration? I am not for opening that Constitution anymore. I withdraw my support. Amen. Thank you, Glenn Beck. I agree. We are not the same people. You are not going to have George Washington and James Madison and Benjamin Franklin and Alexander Hamilton and John Adams thinking about how we're going to change the Constitution. You're going to have Maxine Waters and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and all these people. I don't know if I said her name right. Doesn't matter. But you're going to have these people, a different people, a very unreligious, unchristian people changing our Constitution. So let's talk about solutions. Well, Article 6 of the Constitution says at the bottom, you can see this on the screen, senators and representatives before mentioned, and the members of the several state legislatures and all the executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation. There it is. Bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution. But no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the Constitution of the United States. Article 6 is the answer here. Our elected officials took a sworn oath to uphold the Constitution as written. They aren't doing that. The answer to our problem isn't amending the Constitution with the blind hopes that we'll make it through that political jungle and political theater of changing it, that we won't, we'll get our way 100% and then they'll follow it. That's not the solution. That's a fever dream. The real solution is constitutional fidelity, electing people, having an educated populace that knows who's a good representative and who's a bad representative, that votes in primaries, that says to elected officials, are you going to support the Constitution? Are you going to uphold your Article 6 oath to support and defend the Constitution? That, my friends, is the solution. Follow the Constitution as written. And that's the hard solution, I have to admit. It would be nice to just call a convention and add a couple paragraphs and delete a couple paragraphs and wipe our hands and say, we're fixed. But it's a topical solution that's not going to last. They don't follow the Constitution as written. They're not going to follow it as amended. The real solution is education. Educating each other on the Constitution, educating each other on our country's rich heritage, sharing shows like this, having conversations, and electing people who will uphold the oath. So wrapping up, how close is this to actually happening? If we look at the map, 3 colors there, blue, green, yellow. Blue are states that actually have active legislation this year. Green, states that have passed a Convention of States resolution. In yellow, 3 states there, Wyoming, South Dakota, and Kansas. They have passed COS legislation applying for an amendment convention in one of their chambers, the House or the Senate. So in summary, 19 states, all those green states, there's 19, have passed Convention of States legislation applying for an amendment convention. It's never happened before. Only had one constitutional convention, 1787. 19 states have applied for it. They need 34 states to get their way. They're 15 states away. They're more than halfway there. And if you look at the blue states that have active legislation, and you look at the green or the yellow state, they have all the players in play that they need to make this happen. All it's going to take is those 3 yellow ones to get it passed through, and a few of the blues, and they're done. Now, I will say Montana, Idaho, those 2, I think, have withdrawn the active legislation due to the good work of the folks over at the John Birch Society. But this is dangerously close. And if you've made it this long to the end of the broadcast, I thank you. But that is why we're talking about this today, because this is something that is actively happening in our country. No one's talking about it. You're never going to hear about an Article 5 convention on CNN, MSNBC, Fox, Newsmax. You're not going to hear it. But this is a significantly important issue. Because if this happens, if our Constitution gets opened up, I think it will open a Pandora's box that will change the fabric of our country forever. And it won't be positive. The answer, my friends, isn't changing the Constitution. It's following it. Now, I would encourage you to go to the John Birch Society, jbs.org. They have some good resources on this, action items, various things you can do to contact your representative and say, hey, no Article 5 convention. If you're in one of those states, one of those green states, write your senator, write your state representative, say, hey, let's rescind our application. This is a bad idea. Send them over to jbs.org. Because we have to take our country back, but we have to do it the hard and proper way, which is through educating us and taking responsibility. All right, that is all for our 4th episode of American Made. I hope you enjoy it. Share this with a friend. Leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear what you think of the show. And until next time, keep it local, keep it God-honoring, and keep it American Made. I'm your host, Andrew Muller. We'll see you next week. God bless you all.